Good morning, everyone. This is Allie Mostardo, Senior Association Manager of PPRA. Thank you for joining us today for this year's How I Built this network webinar series. Today, we will hear from Lewis County in upstate New York. We do have you all on mute for the webinar and we'll be using the question function on the sidebar of your screen for any questions. These will be answered at the end. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be provided to all registered attendees via email and will be posted on roadresource.org. I'd now like to welcome Lindsay Matoush, CEO of Vario, who will be facilitating today's webinar along with the Vario team. Vario is the marketing firm that partner with PPRA to create roadresource.org. Lindsay?
Thanks, Allie, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. We are so excited about this webinar series, and we are so excited about our guest, Tim Hunt, who I'll introduce to you in just a moment. We created this series to help the agencies all across the country that are trying to figure out how to stretch budgets further and reverse the trend of deteriorating networks. And so we are on the hunt for agencies who have figured out how they're not really going to get more money, but how they can take a different approach to maintaining their networks and have their networks actually stop losing ground and start gaining ground. And I'm so excited for Tim to talk to you today. In a very short period of time, in really just 3 years, he has seen his network take a radically different trajectory. So I'll quickly share just a little bit about the initiative of Road Resource, and then we'll dive right in and let Tim do most of the talking today. So let's go. Next slide. I'm Lindsay Matoush. I'm the founder at Vario and have been working with Road Resource since 2015 on developing all of the communication and strategic initiatives that you see in that website. Tim Hunt is the star of the show today. Tim has been serving as the Lewis County Highway Superintendent since November of 2020. He has 15 years of experience under his belt, and he maintains 250 miles of public roads, leads a team of 26 road workers. He's an alum of State University of New York, where he majored in poli-sci and economics. This is what's interesting about Tim's perspective. He has a little bit of an unconventional approach to roadway management because of his background in economics and in finance. And he's done just really an incredible job of aligning the network need with available funding and really being creative about how to do that. So I think you guys are going to learn a lot today from him. Outside of work, he enjoys time with his family and riding his dirt bike. So way to go, Tim. Talk a little bit about PPRA. Next slide. So PPRA is an initiative from EMA, ISSA, and ERA. If you're not familiar with them, that's the Asphalt Emulsion Manufacturing Association, the International Slurry Surfacing Association, and the Asphalt Recycling and Reclaiming Association. They came together after listening to city, county, and state agencies all over North America about what it is they needed to manage their networks better from the industry, and they collectively formed PPRA. PPRA has one single promise, and that is this: to empower agencies to be the best possible stewards of their road networks and their taxpayer dollars. Everything you'll find in the website, everything you'll find in our webinars and our emails, and all of it is headed towards this one ambition. This network series you can find them all on the webinars page under the resources tab on roadresource.org. And we are interviewing agencies who can show network level progress over time, not just what did I do this year, but how is my network performing over time. People who have a robust treatment toolbox and know when to use what, and people who are really saying, how do I make every dollar count? In our work at PPRA, we've had the opportunity to do interviews with literally hundreds of agencies all over North America. And what we have found as the difference in road managers who are actually able to demonstrate that network level progress is 4 key things. 1, they have a big toolbox. They know when to use what treatment on the road. 2, they have network level considerations. They don't just think about, hey, this is my treatment plan this year. They think about the network as a whole. Number 3, they pay attention to the success and the innovation of others around the country, because people are trying amazing things all over the country just to make those dollars work harder, to make the network improve and serve its taxpayers better. And lastly, they're just in touch with the industry at large. They have really great partnerships with their contractors, their manufacturers, and the people who kind of know inside and out what it takes to really be successful. So what we'll do today is just a little bit about the effort in the webinar series. We'll let Tim talk a little bit about Lewis County. We'll talk about his network improvement over time, give you a look at that. We'll talk about efficiency. There's not many roadway managers that I have interviewed that have as much of a deep insistence on efficiency and not wasting resources as Tim Hunt. And Tim teaches through the LTAP program across the state of New York to help agencies learn how to manage their budgets differently and how to find funding and be creative with funding. So you're really, I think, going to learn a lot from him about that. We'll talk a little bit about environment, a lot about stretching budgets further, and we'll show you a treatment toolbox. All right, that is enough from me. Time to introduce Tim Hunt. Tim, thank you so much for being here today and for being willing to share with everyone on the webinar what it is that you learned. So tell us a little bit about Lewis County.
Thank you, Lindsay. I moved up here 3 years ago to Lewis County, very rural county in upstate New York. We have 250 miles of public road. We have about $70 million worth of asphalt pavement. We did the math and looked at the 250 miles network and what that value is. We came in here, when I got here, I drove the roads to use the traditional approach, right? We don't have a lot of tools, so we just drove the roads, kind of tried to take a look at what we had and realized that about 50% of the network was in trouble. And it was actually failing at a faster rate than we were planning on paving, because that was really what we were doing at that point, is we were just paving roads and trying to get out of them, keep the road network up. Since then, we went from about a 50% PCI. It was really unknown, but now I have the tools to actually measure that, and our PCI network is up to 91% now in 3 years.
This is, and I'll just highlight how incredible that is. We hear a lot of agencies who are sort of like, they know they need to do things differently. They know they need to take a more proactive approach, but it's hard to know where to get started. And what I love about this story is in just 3 years, we saw really dramatic results just by changing a few things and without getting any more money. So Tim, we'll have you talk a little bit about before and after, and tell us kind of, as you look at the situation, where you started.
Okay. So the plan had always been just doing what we always did. And we had a legislative group that just believed that paving was our way to accomplish our goals. And it was clearly not working. It was failing. And the question was, how long does a road last? Does it last 20 years? Does it last 10 years? And what we were seeing is that the roads weren't lasting 20 years. They weren't even lasting, they were barely lasting 10. They were failing very quickly. And that's because we weren't doing any maintenance. So they were doing what they had always done. We wanted to change that approach. The assessment, and I think this is very common in a lot of smaller agencies like ourselves, was by feel, right? Every spring you'd get in the pickup truck and you drive around the county and you'd take a legal pad and you'd write down your notes on what you thought was happening. And there was very little objective data. So I set out to try to get an assessment tool that was objective and could give me very good data about where to treat roads and what to treat. We really didn't have a maintenance plan. We had a paving plan, but no maintenance plan. And I wanted to set out, look at the entire network, as you mentioned, look at the whole thing and say, how much of that do we need to maintain on an annual basis if we're going to maintain our network properly? So we started to create a maintenance plan. I abandoned the pave our way out of it philosophy. What we would do is we'd start our summer off and we would try to accomplish our paving goals. And then if we had any time left, we'd go to maintenance. And I flipped that upside down and said, no, what we need to do is all of our maintenance. And if we have any time or money left, we're going to pave. So we turned that upside down. Out of the 250 miles of road, they tried to pave 12.5 miles per year, but the roads were only lasting 10 to 12 years. And so they were falling behind. And that's what we had to change. So that's what I came in to try to do. And I think, some of the goals we've accomplished, some we've always got more to do. Lindsay, I can't hear you.
Thank you. And go back one, Paul. So in 2020, when you kind of first took on this role, the result of this way of doing things, we call it on the website, we reference it as the worst first way. Not calling anybody worse, but like attacking the worst roads first. And the result was just the network kept deteriorating. You cannot, it is near impossible unless you have tons and tons of money. And I can count on less than one hand how many roadway managers have told me they have more money than they need. It's just impossible to manage a roadway network that way. So the network in very poor condition, continuing to deteriorate. And then you had kind of an aha, one big sort of like, wait a minute, if we look at the money differently, next slide.
So, paving is a capital expenditure and maintenance is operational. And one of the problems that we have, and this is throughout New York State, is the way the funding comes in to maintain our road networks. Most communities rely on a state funding source called CHIPS. And the CHIPS program allows you to do surface treating or maintenance on a road. But once you do that, you can't do it again for another 10 years. You can't do anything for that road for 10 years, which is a really challenging problem. So what ends up happening is we spend all of that money on paving and we do very little maintenance. And so I set about looking at my budget to try to figure out how to solve that problem. And what I was able to do through some accounting is take some money that the county had given me and reallocate that over onto the CHIPS program, therefore freeing up money so that we could start a robust maintenance program. So there was no new money, no additional money. It was really kind of an accounting of, hey, some of the things that we can put. So if I pave 5 miles of road, I can charge for my labor, I can charge for our trucks, and I can free up money that the county had given me for those things and allow me to really get to the maintenance that we needed to do.
So in order to do that, and we'll give you some more of the specifics later, but in order to do that, what Tim really did was sort of start building backwards.
Yes. Yep. So, as I said, our roads were only lasting 8 to 12 years, and we needed them to last 20. And I knew, and I will tell you, Lindsay, you already mentioned that I don't come from a highway background. That's not my background at all. So when I started out as a highway superintendent, I started going to all the LTAP programs, started learning from the people who've been doing this their whole lives. And I learn every day, even now. There's so many amazing people, even employees that I have here teach me things all the time about road maintenance. But what I did understand was the fundamentals of get the water away from the road, cut the shoulders, dig the ditches, get good drainage, positive drainage, and then seal. Seal those roads, keep the water away from them and off of them, and your roads are going to last longer. So knowing that and knowing that that was not what we were doing. We were doing just the opposite. We're paving it, but then we weren't doing the basic maintenance stuff. So I said, let's start with the maintenance first. And what are those goals? We've got to start setting targets. So if we have 250 miles of road and we want to seal a road every 6 years, I have to seal 41 miles of road a year. So that's a target. If I wanted to do the same with cutting shoulders, I've got to set a goal and say, how many miles of shoulders do I cut every year? How many miles of ditching do I need to do every year? And let's do those first. And then if there's any time left over at the end of the year, then we'll worry about our paving after the fact. So, so that's kind of how we did it. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think what's pretty exciting about that is like, just again, having somebody come in from almost outside of the engineering or pavement world to go, wait, how do we just plan differently is really, I think, what your expertise is. And this is kind of a step-by-step, how'd you do it? Like kind of 4 simple phases. And it's just kind of so simple. It's like, okay, anybody could kind of start here.
Right. Well, and to that point, Lindsay, I have so many friends in the industry who've become highway superintendents, got elected as a town highway superintendent or took a role, and they drive the roads and they instantly are paralyzed with anxiety because their problems are so big and their money is so small and they don't know what to do first, right? And this is a big ship. We're not going to turn it today. We're going to turn it over time. So you got to look at the entire network and say, okay, this road might be really bad and people are complaining, and this road's I'm concerned about, and this one I'm concerned about. Don't worry about that. Look at the overall network, and then you can make better priorities out of that. So So what I did is I set out very first year, our paving plan was already in place. I found money to start doing sealing. And I said, I want to try to seal as much as I can. So the first year I was able to seal 35 miles of road in the first year. And I was honestly not very concerned about whether the roads were candidates or not. I didn't have good data at that point. I was just looking geographically and saying, okay, I'm going to start in this area and kind of move around the county. I just want to start sealing roads. I want to prevent further deterioration of the roads, and just as a stopgap to start to get a baseline. Then phase two was I need to get the data so that I can start spending the money more efficiently. I don't want to just kind of throw money at roads that don't need sealing or that have already deteriorated too far and aren't a candidate for sealing. But how do I get there without the right assessment tools? So that was phase two, and I went out and actually technology has developed so much recently. We were able to find a program that uses artificial intelligence that maps our roads and gives us a PCI rating on every road and the condition. And I'm able to use that tool to target the money specifically toward the right road at the right time, as we always say. And then phase three was create a true maintenance plan. And as I mentioned, just engineering backwards and saying, okay, we have 250 miles a year. What should our expectations or our goals every year be? So if we're going to seal X number of miles each year, we're going to try to do the same with cutting brush and trimming back. We wanted to get our right of way back. The trees had grown right into the edges of the road. We wanted to start to clean our ditches and get our shoulders cut, all designed to improve the lifespan of that road. So I set about doing that. And then phase four was utilizing more tools in the toolbox. So as I mentioned, the first year, I just wanted to seal things. After that, then I started to look at, is that a single or a double? Can we add crack filling to the mix, which is the next phase of this? And we started to use some micro paving in places where it was more appropriate. We'd get a little bit longer lifespan. So there's a lot of tools out there. Also cold in place recycling, which is a tool we always used up here and continue to use in upstate New York. But just adding as many tools as we can and trying to target those to the right roads at that right time. And the data has been huge.
And I think the other big thing here is that paving moved from a first resort to a last resort. And that really changed everything. It frees up those dollars. We'll show that in some of the calculator tools on the website in just a second. Quickly, let's hit, you kind of covered this, you mentioned this earlier, but I thought it might be helpful. Next slide, for people to just see kind of your report card, and how you were able to sort of go, okay, how do I make the money work?
Well, this is interesting. It stemmed from a conversation with my county manager, actually. I was in my annual review, and he made the comment that I don't really know how to judge your performance. And I said, well, it's pretty easy. If the road network's getting better, keep me. And if it's getting worse, fire me. It's really that simple. And then from that, I said, well, it's not exactly that simple, but we could easily develop a scorecard. So I put together this scorecard right here and said, we need to seal 41.4 miles if we're going to get on a 6-year rotation. If we're going to stripe the roads in Lewis County every 3 years. Now, these were based off of our actual budget. This is what we realistically could do. I think striping might have to move to a 2-year or an every year, but that's a conversation I'm going to start to have with the legislators. But let's talk about what we have the money to realistically do in the budget, and then we can start to talk about whether we're happy with that level of service, right? Yes. Cutting shoulders, same thing. 6 years, I think we use a lot of sand up here in the wintertime. The shoulders build up very fast. It holds the water on the road. We see it infiltrate under the edges of the road. We start to see the side of the roads break off. So we need to get those shoulders cut so that water can get out to the ditches. So every 6 years, if we were to do that, we've got to do 41.4 miles. Same with ditching, trees, brush, and our paving. So we set concrete goals that we can be held accountable to and say, are we meeting those goals?
Yeah, and what I think is so helpful, when we interview agencies, we hear all the time, hey, the pressure I get from electeds is big and it can shift, right? Like it can sort of create these pet projects that kind of shift our plan or shift our attention. And so what I'm hoping some of you can kind of take today is a little bit of how Tim, like Tim does a really good job of speaking kind of non-roady. So if you're trying to talk to a bunch of rotating elected officials with shifting priorities about how to kind of break things down and think about roads, grab the PowerPoint, use it, because I think that he has some real gold in here. So how we progressed, pretty cool to just sort of see over 3 years what you did each year, kind of starting somewhere and slowly gaining ground.
Yep. And Lindsay, to that point, the legislators often will push their priority because they don't know any better, right? If I'm an elected official and my constituent comes to me and says, this road is terrible, and they come to you and say, you need to pave this road because it's terrible, but what they don't know is you might have 5 other roads that are worse, and nobody's ever showed them that, never told them that, you know. And so the more data you can provide your legislators as well, they want to do the right things, but oftentimes they're in the dark and they don't know what those are. So
that's right. Yeah. So you guys can kind of see here, one of the things that we often see when people start the journey of proactive management, it's not like you push the button and suddenly your roads, your whole network's better, right? It's a slow gain over time. And you guys can kind of read this on screen, but you can see how each year he added another treatment or two and did a little bit more preventative maintenance, both up and down the curve. So you see him doing, you know, and this year he's working on adding crack seal and crack fill, which is a very efficient way to keep moisture out of your roads. So you can see him just keep adding treatments up the curve and then adding treatments down the curve to be able to have something for kind of each point in that pavement deterioration.
the other thing to mention, Lindsay, is sometimes you got to pick when the opportunities are right. So in this year, 2023, what had happened is we had 2 very large box culverts that were failing, a $1.2 million project, and the legislators earmarked capital money for those 2 box culverts. Well, I went to them and said, can I put those on chips because I know they're going to last 10 years, take the 1.2 million that you gave me and do a lot of sealing this year, really get caught up because we're way behind. And they said, yeah, that's fine. It's the same money. It's just in a different place. So I was able to double my chip sealing from a typical 41 miles to 77 miles this year, just by utilizing those resources in that way.
I love it. So we'll show you guys, Tim, this is kind of a what it looked like slide with some of his roads. And Tim uses a pretty cool program. I am mindful of time, Tim, but I'd love you to take just a few minutes and show us kind of how this works. This, I think, can work really well for taxpayers as well as for legislators.
Okay, can you see my screen, Lindsay?
No, we were seeing it, but something just changed. Maybe try, there you go. There you go. Now we can see it this time.
Okay. All right. Great. So this is a great program that I was able to find. There's a cell phone that's mounted in my pickup truck, and as I drive the roads, it actually videotapes them. That video is available. If I click on any segment of the road, you can actually pull up the video from that segment of the date that you drove it. So I could have 20 times that I've driven this road, and I can look at it at different times throughout the year. But it also, as it's doing it, it uploads that into an artificial intelligence computer, and it analyzes all of the road defects and produces reports. So I can actually export this data out into Excel. I can look at my roads. In fact, here is just a high-level overview of my road condition right now. This is my worst road. It's a 3% on the PCI index, and that's where we're paving next year is the 3 and the 25%. And then this is the rest of my road network right here. And you can see the total, the average PCI score of 91%. And it does that as it's driving down the road, analyzing all of the defects. So I can look at it in a really detailed way. I can look at every 500-foot segment, 250-foot, whatever I choose to do. So this is my road network right now on a heat map. The dark colors are the roads that I still have problems with. And you'll see that this road right here, those are all next year's surface treating. That's where we're headed. So we're going to pothole patch them very well. We're going to surface treat those roads, and we're going to go and improve them. And the photo that you showed was this road right here, which is Wood Battle Road. And when I got here, and this is one of the things that always has amazed me as a road manager, this was Wood Battle Road when I got here. Not a bad country road, but it was in dire condition. You could start to see the raveling in this road in different sections. It was really the stone was starting to peel apart and come out of that. Might have grabbed the wrong section of road. But then you look at that road 3 years later, I chip sealed it that year, and then 3 years later, it dramatically improved that road. Actually, I think it's this one. I just grabbed the wrong screenshot, but and it just improved it. And that's the pictures that you have on your screen. So yeah, that's just a little bit of
that visual map. I think especially when you're dealing with other decision makers, being able to kind of look at the network as a whole. And if you guys haven't seen it, we have on the roadresource.org site, we have a section of resources for taxpayers that actually has a little video that you can share that shows what that looks like with the green, the red, and the yellow, just sort of giving you a visual cue to go, wow, what does my network look like? So,
right. And if you look at that pre-21 slide there, you can see the raveling on your slide. You see the picture on the left. I mean, you drive that road, you know, within a year or two, all of that is going to start coming apart. And this is 2 years after we just chip sealed it. Simple chip seal on a country rural road really improved that road dramatically.
Well, and one of the things that I really love about the program that you're using is your use of data. And one of the things that as pavement managers get into this for 5 years or 6 years or 10 years, they're able to really measure how long can I expect these treatments to last. And of course, technology evolves and improves, and we see people getting significantly more life than they imagined out of specific treatments.
Yes.
And they last differently in different contexts and environments. So what do they do in your network? And when you start planning, hey, if you can get 8 years out of microsurfacing or 9 years instead of 6 years, that changes how you plan and how you spend money. And so being able to kind of measure this, you'll know what exactly does a chip seal get me in this area. And it lets you kind of play the game better. So where are you at today? I want to just keep us moving.
Sure.
91%. This is incredible. Yeah. I don't know how many people that have a PCI of 91% in their network. And I just think it's really worth celebrating that 3 years of incredibly hard intentional work, shifting dollars up the curve, making the most of resources that you've already paid for with recycling and that kind of thing has gained so much ground.
Thank you. And when I actually took that heat map that I just showed you and I showed it to our legislators and I did a presentation on this, one of the things that they were amazed at is they could actually see. So when I say the capital plan for 2024, 2025, 26 is pave this, and show them the map, they're like, oh, it's based on real data. It's real information about where we should be placing our dollars. And it's not on who's complaining the loudest or is it because this constituency is allegedly more important than the other? You always get that in any community, right? Why'd you do their neighborhood, not my neighborhood? Must be so-and-so lives there or whatever. This takes all of that off the table and you have a rational plan based on the facts.
There you go. Okay, so let's talk about efficiency. One of the big things that I learned and heard Tim talk about differently than many other folks in the space is just how much he prioritized efficiency and proactivity really across the board. So kind of the big aha, and this is me quoting Tim, go ahead, next slide, is reallocate labor and resources to be proactive instead of reactive. So next slide will show a little bit of just some examples of how Tim has done that.
So one of the things that I've noticed, and this is just government in general, right? We tend to let problems fester until they become big problems, and then we end up having to spend all of our time reacting to those problems, right? So, for example, would it be better to, you send your crews out every time there's a storm on a Saturday night to pick up tree branches, or could you spend the time during the week on regular time to cut any trees that have hazard limbs in them? And what ends up happening is our budget over time gets devoted more to reacting to crisis than it does to planning to prevent it from happening to begin with. The biggest one, and it's not even up here, is equipment, right? So we don't capital plan well, and we don't replace our plow trucks and our trucks soon enough, and they get out of shape and they're in bad condition. And now we have to have people in the shop all the time repairing them. So we end up devoting a bigger chunk of our budget to our repair budget. And as a result, we have less money for capital, and we don't buy more trucks, and the fleet gets even older and in worse condition, and the cycle repeats itself, right? So good proactive planning gets you out of that cycle. So if you're managing your fleet properly, you lower your repair costs and your labor costs to fix those trucks, and now your people are out fixing roads instead of in the shop fixing trucks to fix roads. So that's an example.
Tim, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that are coming in. We'll have some Q&A at the end, but I want to just answer some questions in real time. How are you measuring the impact or results of your program? Is it a change in PCI per year or other?
How am I realizing the?
How are you measuring the impact of your program?
Oh.
Are you using a change in PCI per year or other?
Yes, I actually, I look at the PCI index twice per year. I do it in the spring and I do it in the fall. So I do it pre-construction, post-construction. And then as well, the following spring, when I do the PCI, I look to see the percentage drop in PCI as well. Because if I see a significant drop in the PCI, that signals to me that there might be a bigger problem. Now that, I might have sealed that road, but there might be a base failure. And I actually, that it pops right out like instantly if you see large drops in the PCI. You don't see it very often, but you will see it because I don't get it right every time, right? Maybe I did the wrong treatment on a problem. So yes, I measure the increases as well as the decreases, and I do it twice a year.
I want to just highlight one thing that I think you don't credit yourself enough for, Tim, and that's when you just said, sometimes I get it wrong. And I think a lot of the agencies that I know feel a lot of pressure to not get it wrong. Like if a treatment fails, maybe it wasn't even a bad treatment, maybe it went on the wrong road. Or maybe something happened with the weather that day. A lot of times they'll just walk away from it because they're feeling that pressure to sort of take care of these roads and make sure the money, succeeds and is well spent. And I think one of the things that we see across the board in every leader that I have ever seen make remarkable change is an appetite of curiosity and a willingness to kind of learn and explore and try things. And when you're using data like this to tell the story to decision makers, it's easier to sort of have that appetite that, hey, some of these things aren't going to work exactly as we expect, but look at where we're headed. You can't argue with results.
Right. Sure. It's an R&D budget. I think you and I talked about that, is that, sometimes planning for a failure is a good thing too. Like try something new, but do it on a limited basis. And if it fails, no harm, no foul, but you've learned some new things, right?
Quickly mention what you're trying with the bridges this year because of the studs from snowmobiling. I know it's just very quickly. It's so interesting.
Yeah. So up here, we have a very, very large tourist industry with snowmobiling. And they use our roads often to cross over our bridges, and we have concrete bridge decks. And the studs, the carbide studs on the snowmobiles, damage the concrete considerably. So I was trying to find a wear course that I could put on the bridge decks that didn't weigh a lot and that would protect them, and I could just redo it every 5 or 6 years to keep the studs from damaging. And when I started asking, calling around, talking to the industry, talking to the bridge experts, there really wasn't a lot of great ideas out there. The industry helped me out, and they said, here's something we can try. So what we did is we tack coated the concrete bridge deck. We put a chip seal on it. We let the traffic pound it down for a month or two, and then we micro paved over that. And they came out great. They really do look awesome, and we're pretty excited to see what's going to happen. So the fear is the plow going to catch that, peel it off of the concrete? We don't think it's going to. We're hoping that if we can get 5 or 6 years out of it and then redo it, we've created a wear course there to protect those bridges. So
you're trying something. You're just trying to be efficient with dollars, which I just wanted people to kind of see that appetite. There's a couple of more questions that came in. I'm going to try to answer them for the sake of time. Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. I'll link to information on the video and the pavement management system that he's using. We can send that out after the webinar. Whatever questions we don't get to today, we'll ask Tim to sort of answer, and we'll send that out in addition to a link to the webinar. And then you've had a couple questions about sealing. People want to make sure they understand what type of sealing you're doing. To my understanding, you're talking primarily about chip seal, micro surfacing as a type of
Yes.
sealing, and also crack sealing you're adding this year. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, let's talk about environmental impact. We've been pretty focused on efficiency and roads improving and saving money. Let's talk about environment, because you know, what we see in our seed is that across the country, depending on where you are probably starting to face increased regulatory pressures around sustainability. So as it's coming, as you're looking ahead, talk to us a little bit about this, Tim.
Absolutely, and we're in New York, so we're kind of leading the way. And New York State, as of January 1st of 2024, or I'm sorry, 2023, took all of the hot mix out of their bid specs. So the state DOT can only use warm mix pavement now. So we see these things coming. We understand what's happening. And the best way for us to show that we're managing that carbon footprint is by being proactive, right? Make a road last 25 years as opposed to 15 years, and you're going to lower that carbon footprint dramatically. The rural areas have been doing it for a long time. We also have an issue with availability of materials. When you're in a rural area, you don't have a hot mix plant every 15 or 20 miles. So you don't just go throw hot mix at everything. Cold in place recycling has been used for a long time because of the trucking costs and the effectiveness of doing that. So we do it because of cost and availability, logistics in the rural areas, but it's also leading right to where the world's heading with sustainability and managing your networks.
Absolutely, and we have a tool on the site that we're going to take you to. What we like to do is kind of use stories like Tim's to sort of help you guys see how to put the pieces together, and then make sure we give you enough. You can kind of try this at home, folks. So this is the cost in green calculator. Paul, will you go up to the menu here? Our Vanna White, Paul Ribbons, is demonstrating this for us, and just highlight for people to see. It's under pavement preservation, and then you see sustainability calculator. That's where we are. So this allows you to compare a conventional treatment to a more sustainable treatment. So we'll scroll down, and under conventional, we'll select a treatment. So let's select thin lift. And then under square yards, let's put 100,000 square yards. And then let's compare that over on the right to a microsurfacing single lift. And we'll add 100,000 square yards. Now you might say, okay, well, a single lift isn't going to get me the same result as a thin lift. Let's try a double lift of microsurfacing. And you can kind of play with this. What I want you to see here is the unit cost and the life extension. You can edit those to reflect where you are. These are national averages from several years ago. They're really just designed to give us a baseline, which means that they're irrelevant to you. So you can either edit them right in the calculators, or if you create a login in roadresource.org in the top right corner, you can program all of the costs and the life extension data and the structural contribution of different treatments and customize it exactly to your network, so that you can see exactly what it does for you. And what you see down here is that the total cost is significantly lower by doing a microsurfacing double lift on 100,000 square yards of pavement. We save $300,000, and we reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 92%, which is the green equivalent of removing 103 passenger vehicles from US roadways for an entire year. That's good stuff for communicating with taxpayers. You can play with this and compare different treatments here, but we wanted you to see that. And then the next thing we're going to do is take you to a really cool tool to help you consider how to stretch budgets further. So we're going to take you to one more calculator on the site called the remaining service life calculator. Yeah. So go back a couple slides, and Tim will actually teach them how to use this first. So if you are not familiar with remaining service life, go ahead and go, Paul. Yeah, show them right where that is to the About page. This is under Network Optimization, and we're on the About page of Remaining Service Life. So let me show you here what this looks like. So here's the idea. We're going to start thinking about the life of your network. If you have 500 miles in a network, that means you have 500 mile years of life that you lose every year. So if you think about it, that road's going to live however long it lives, but each year you're going to lose 1 year of life from every single mile of that road. So the critical concept here is to understand 500 mile network loses 500 mile years of life every single year. So then a way to think about your treatment plan is, if my treatment plan is adding more than 500 mile years of life every year, my network's going to gain ground. If I'm not, if I'm adding less than 500 mile years of life, I am contributing to the network continuing to deteriorate every single year. Here's an example, and then I'll show you the calculator. So right here on the left, you see a worst first approach. And what you see before we kind of click on those little yellow arrows, you see that most of the money is spent in pretty extensive treatments. We've got 9 miles of reconstruction, 16 miles of rehab, and not doing any preservation. We meet agencies all the time where this is how they're managing their roads. What you can see is this agency has 1,000 network lane miles. That means every year they're losing 1,000 mile years of life. And their treatment plan only added 433 mile years of life. The way that's calculated is by saying, okay, if I reconstruct 1 mile of road, that may give me 20 more years of life. If I do that to 4 miles of road, that will give me 80 years of life. If I crack seal 1 mile of road, that might add 2 years of life. If I do that for 20 miles of road, that adds 40 years of life. So all we're doing is kind of a basic equation, is adding up the impact of a treatment plan across a network and comparing it to how much life we're going to lose each year. Then on the right-hand side, what you see is the same agency spends their money differently and gains ground. You see on the left side, they have a network deficit of 567 mile years of life. And Paul, go ahead and click on those yellow arrows of reconstruction on the, and now compare it to reconstruction on the left. And you see what they did, and you can kind of see the treatments here. These are actual things that came from a pavement management consultant who showed us what some of his clients have been doing. You can sort of see, instead of doing 9 miles of reconstruction, they still had some roads they had to pave. They dropped it to 4. And instead of doing a total remove and replace, they did an FDR, which makes use of the existing pavement. It's a more cost-effective treatment. Then they did less rehab, and instead of, again, milling and filling, they're recycling, which is more efficient, it's more environmentally friendly, it's faster, it doesn't destroy the roads around there. And when it can be used as a substitute, it's just a really cost-effective way to go about it. And then they took all the savings from the bottom of the curve, and they did a bunch of preservation. And so they did 192 miles of preservation. You can see a sample treatment plan there. And you can see that for the same budget, they were able to gain 104 mile years of life instead of lose 567. So you can try it at home, guys. Go to the calculator. And you'll see here, we'll just quickly show you how to do this. So go ahead and put in 1,000 network lane miles. So we'll just add, okay, this is a sample network here, and we're gonna assume an average lane width, and let's assume our budget is $1 million. So what it's gonna show you there is your remaining budget. $10 million would be awesome. I'm sure a lot of people would love to have that. And then over here, you add a treatment type. So let's go ahead and do, scrolling down to the bottom, we'll do a full depth remove and replace. Okay, and let's say we do that on 10 miles of road. All right, we can't even do that. Let's try 2 miles of road. All right, and now let's do a, we'll add another treatment. So let's do a major mill and fill. And let's try that on 3 miles of road. Okay, and now let's do, we'll do one more. Let's do an ultra thin lift. And we'll try that on 4 miles of road. All right, so let's scroll down and see our impact. Right now we've spent our entire budget, and based on, and we're kind of making up numbers here, but based on a 1,000-mile network, we've lost 873 mile years of life, and we've only addressed 1% of the roads in our network. If you scroll back up, you can try to play with, okay, what if we don't full depth remove and replace those roads? Let's just let them fail for another year. And instead, let's do some microsurfacing, single, double lift alert. And let's try that for 10 miles. And now scroll back down, and instead of a major mill and fill, let's do a scrub seal or a cape seal. And we're going to do that on those same 3 miles. Instead of ultra thin lift, that would actually probably be a better substitute for micro, not a pavement person. But let's actually just convert those 4 miles to microsurfacing, single lift. We still have $500,000 to play with. So now let's add chip seal, one of Tim's favorites. Okay, and let's do that on 20 miles. Let's add crack seal. And let's do that on another 30 miles. Crack seal is one of the most efficient treatments out there. All right, so you can see here, scroll back down. I'm not going to finish this for the sake of time, but you can see here that by spending the money differently, we're slowly decreasing our deficit and addressing a greater percentage of roads in the network. There's some actual examples on here, scroll back up, that you guys can play with. And there's a video tutorial here, but this is really the first stop. What I would encourage anybody learning or playing with this, watch the tutorial and then enter your treatment plan from last year or your proposed treatment plan for next year and go, okay, what's the impact on my network if I try this? But that's a little bit of theory. That's a kind of try it at home, guys. Let's go back to our slides and we will show you how Tim actually did this on his network.
Yep. So this is my actual network right here. So 500 lane miles, 250 center line miles. Put in the width of the road, put in my $4.8 million that I have to spend every year, and that the very first year, this is what we did. We paved, and you see that the effects where only 4% of the roads were addressed, and we lost 200 years of lane mile life. So not a good outcome. So then we addressed that the following year, 2021, we went and changed up the course and we added 392 miles or 392 years of life to it. And then in 2022, it's cut off a little bit at the bottom, but that was even more significant. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I believe that was like 500 or 600 lane mile years that were added to that. So. And then in 2023, this year was the real big hit. We really did a lot of surface treating. As I mentioned, I did a little swapping around with some money and was able to pull off a large amount of surface treating. And we added 721 life miles of life years to the network. And we addressed 34% of our roads. So really trying to grab as much service life every year as we can and add it back into the network. So
what does it look like over time? This is really impressive. And what we see a lot, guys, is when you start this journey, sometimes people lose every year for 3 or 4 years of trying, but they just lose less until they start building momentum and the ball starts kind of rolling in the right direction. And then they're able to see results like this. And this is just this is an incredible way too. We're pretty convinced that all the road managers out there do not get enough credit from taxpayers, from bosses, from the pressures they face 8 ways to Sunday. So on behalf of our team, we'd love to say thank you to all of you on the call. We're sure you don't hear it enough. This is a great tool to get some credit. So Tim, talk a little bit about just being creative and finding funding for this, because I think this is one of the most remarkable things that you bring to the table. This is what you teach people all over New York how to do. Talk to us, just spend a few minutes talking us through this, and then we'll kind of start winding down the webinar.
I do think that people are really constrained by the way their organizations are funded, particularly here in New York with a 10-year rule. So you have to figure out how to be creative. Where can I move money around? And it's often, there's multiple funding sources for our budgets. There's some local money. There's usually some revenue or some funding from the state. So just by moving things around, but we want to start with maintenance first. And that's the first thing, is figuring out how to do those maintenance programs with your budget money. So start with maintenance first. Always maintain good communication with your legislators. And I think this is sometimes difficult, right? We don't want to have these conversations. I put together these PowerPoint presentations just like we're having right now, and I give them to our legislators to the point that they go, oh, I didn't know this, or I didn't understand that. I had some legislators who believed that the only thing that was effective is hot mix and paving, because that's what the state does, and that's what we should do. Well, on their network has a completely different use case than ours does. So showing them some of the data and really communicating with them. Have a long-term plan. I think it's not good. I once was a local elected official, and I hated it when they came in and said, this is what we want to do today. I want to know what we're doing tomorrow and the next day as well. I'd like to know what the plan is. So go in there with a long-term plan for paving, for your maintenance, for everything, your capital expenditures. Look at your overall network, not any one single component. This gets us in trouble when we start looking at single components and nobody knows how does that rate with the rest of the system. When I come in and say I want to pave this road, but they don't know the condition of the other roads, we have to defend ourselves, and that's not where we want to be. Our funding limits us to the process the last 10 years or more. So you have to be creative. I recommend here in New York State to maximize your funding, put things that you know are going to last 10 years onto your CHIPS program. For example, culvert pipes.
Sorry,
Yep.
That's a New York specific thing. So will you just explain that to some of the folks who aren't from New York who might not have the same constraints?
Yeah, so in New York State, most of us get what is called CHIPS funding, which is a consolidated highway improvement program. So when you fill up your car, there's a gas tax, and that was supposed to go into a lockbox, which was redistributed to all the local communities through a formula, and it worked very well. It's a good formula. However, that money got used, and now we have to bond for that money every year, and the bond is a 10-year bond. So the bond council has said, we're not going to let you use the money unless the product has a 10-year life. Well, we worked hard to let them to include things like chip seals and microsurfacing, and but you still have to live by the 10-year life. So it creates a little bit of a hardship. But there are things that we do that we don't think about, right? So oftentimes we replace culvert pipes and we use local money for that. Well, a culvert pipe's going to last 10 years easily. Put those on the CHIPS report, free up the money you were using for your culvert pipes, and use that for some maintenance programs, right? So really comb through, understand your budget and where you're spending your money, and is it local money or what money is being used, and try to be creative that way. So I moved county money to CHIPS funding, or moved some things that we were doing with county money to CHIPS funding, reduced the amount of miles we were paving, but added more things to it. So labor, trucking, etc., freeing up money to allow us to do more prevention. So move county savings to prevention and reallocate money upstream. So steel roads instead of making patch. For example, we made 5,000 ton of patch every year. I'd like to get out of that business because that's reacting to a pothole as opposed to preventing the pothole to begin with. So if I could take the money that we were making patch with, reallocate it into sealing, and reduce the amount of patch we need, that's a win-win, right? So that's looking at how do you spend your money proactively versus reactively. So that just some, typical budget tricks, but that's what we do every day, is try to figure out how we're going to pay for this stuff and get proactive on our network.
Totally. So I think that's just really incredible strategies and tactics to sort of move the money to make it go further. Treatment toolbox, we always get asked this, so we'll just quickly show this slide. of kind of this is what you are using today. And you call the microsurfacing and slurry seal, you call that micro paving. I think partially because the term paving is covered under CHIPS funding, is that right? And so
Correct.
we're just
Yes.
micro paving and that's covered, even though is there, and what you're experimenting with next is a pre-treatment crack seal and getting that down before other treatments. That's definitely best
Yes.
practice in some of these spot treatments, which I thought was
Yes.
interesting.
So, I have some roads that are in excellent condition, really. They're very good condition. 90% of the roads are in good conditions, but I have some areas where they weren't chip sealed soon enough, and under maple trees or under areas where, they weren't getting enough sunlight, they started to ravel and there's just a little bit of deterioration. So what's the best way to get that surface restored without paving, without going and doing a whole pave or shim? So I'm looking at maybe going in and doing some micro just in limited spots on that road that's really a 90 right now, 90% in great shape. Do those, then chip seal the whole road, and now we're back to a really good road. So really targeting the money to the very specific segment of the road that needs it. And that's how we're going to stretch those dollars as far as we can.
This is one of Tim's kind of quotes that I just thought was worth grabbing. Private world does a lot of R&D to solve problems, and in the government world, we avoid it, and that's a huge mistake. It can still be done, and honestly, Tim, you sound like you're having a lot of fun with it, trying to kind of play that game and figure out how do I just make this work.
Whether it's the tool that did the assessment on the road is new. These are all new tools, and it's kind of cutting edge, but it takes money, and I didn't know if it was going to work, right? So would you do it or not? Well, in business, if you don't constantly lean forward and try to find the next solution to be more efficient, you're going to fail. Your business is ultimately going to become irrelevant. You're going to go out of business. The same thing in our world. So if you're not looking for a better way to do things constantly, it doesn't mean you go out and spend all your money on some unproven or new treatment, but we should always be looking at spending at least a little bit of our budget on some new or unproven treatment, and you're going to find some real successes in there, whether it's cutting edges on your plows or ground speed controllers when we're using sand and salt. There's all sorts of things that we can look at that our vendors are coming up with marketing, and we've seen that even in the asphalt and emulsions. There's more tools being added to that toolbox every day, and unless we try them, unless we work with folks and maybe do a limited test, see what happens, we're just going to become irrelevant.
So we asked Tim, and then we'll take about 5 minutes of questions and answers, and whatever we don't get to today, we will send to Tim an email, and we will have him answer that. So you guys can go ahead and drop those in the chat, any questions that you have that you'd like for Tim to answer. But we did start with this one for agencies just getting started or who maybe have smaller budgets. Tim has about a $5 million budget. Am I right, Tim?
Yes.
So people have even smaller budgets. What advice would you give? And here's what he had to say.
So I started off as a town highway superintendent with 60 miles of road and a much smaller budget, but utilize multiple treatments. There's not a one size fits all. I've looked at some of our towns that just said we're going to pave 1 mile of road because that's all we can afford. We're going to just do one per year, and they might have a 30 miles of network. Well, they're not going to get back to the first mile for 30 years, and in the meantime, the roads are failing at a rate of 10 every 10 years, 12 years is all they're lasting. So pretty soon their entire road network is in terrible condition. So you utilize multiple treatments, work with your vendors to come up with the right treatment, the right place. Address roads at all points on the curve. Don't focus at just, the roads that need sealing or the roads that need paving. That curve and each tool in our toolbox is to address them at different points on the deterioration curve or on the depreciation curve. Residents will appreciate education. I could do better at that myself. Some of the things we do, the residents don't understand. They just want a paved road, right? They just assume we're going to go out and do a nice hot mix road in front of their house. Why are you using oil and stone? We don't like it. We need to educate people that these practices, the things that we do are very expensive. They don't want their tax dollars to go up. We have an obligation to manage this network in the most efficient way, to make sure that their tax dollars are being utilized appropriately. And so we do need to educate our residents, and we can all be better, myself included. So use the tools that are available to us. Your website has some really good tools. I use it every year before I start my program to make sure I'm adding life and the sustainability benefits, as you had mentioned. Make sure you're communicating that, because you'll be surprised at how many people do pay attention to that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining today. We have just a couple questions coming in. One of the things that somebody was asking, Tim, would you be willing to kind of share an update? They're interested in this experimental thing that you're doing on the bridge deck, and they're wondering if you'd be willing to kind of share progress with that. So if it's okay,
Absolutely.
We'll mind us sharing your contact information. I know I've got you on the spot with like a couple hundred people watching.
No, you feel free to share my email and my phone number. I'm always willing to talk with folks.
Awesome. And then we also have a LinkedIn group. If you can find PPRA on LinkedIn, we have a user group where we encourage people to post questions and comments just like this. So Tim could post something like, has anybody tried anything on bridge decks to protect the concrete from the carbide studs in snowmobiles? And other people could share that information. So our goal at PPRA is not to have all the answers, but to set the table for a conversation, to make sure you guys can learn from each other, and to make sure that we equip you with all the tools that you need to be successful in reversing deteriorating network trends. So Tim, we're right at 11:30 here Central, so we'll go ahead and close down the webinar. Tim, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for the incredible job you're doing out there, and thank you for being willing to share all of this with folks across the country. I know that it will help more people gain ground. So thank you very much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.